Week 3. You did it. You made it all the way to week 3. That's impressive. It's pretty good. Okay, so here's what we're going to do tonight. First thing I want to do is welcome those of you who may be online with us and want to say we're glad you're here, but then I also want to lay the framework for how this night will unfold. The first, I'll say 10 minutes. What you're going to do is you're going to share the story that you worked on, your faith story from last week. So were all of you here last week?
No.
Okay, if you weren't, no big deal. On page, do you have a book in front of you? On page 9, there is what we call a storyboard. You storyboard your life. And so if you want to, you can do that now. Those of you who weren't here last week, or I should say, those of you who have the opportunity to do it and worked on it, or want to just work on it on the fly, if you didn't do your homework, you can do that as well. And we can take about 10 minutes and share with one another our faith journeys. After we're done doing that, we're going to work our way through pages 11 and 12 and 13. And I'm going to finish this evening with, good evening, come on in. I'm going to finish this evening with some resources that I want to show you and give you access to based off of you emailing me. And I will, once you email me, send you the resources. Okay? So that way we can serve on what gets tossed in the can, because then I know who wants it actually will get it. Make yourself comfortable. I know this isn't the greatest setup. If you have long legs like me and you bang the table legs, you can move wherever you want to feel more comfortable. But can I open us up in prayer, and then we will go ahead and dive in. Thanks, God, for this day and for the opportunity to be alive and to experience your grace and goodness. We're thankful for this class, and we're thankful for what we've learned already, what we will learn, and we're thankful for the opportunity that we have with our friends and family and neighbors and co-workers and everyone we come into contact with to bear witness to your work in this world, both in word and in deed. Help us to, as we faithfully strive to live like your Son, find ways to express the love that you have, that you gave us a glimpse of in your Son to the world around us. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. So take the first couple of minutes and share with the people on either side of you your storyboard from last week. If you didn't do it or didn't bring it with you, no problem. Page 9. I'm out of books though, but there's 2 right here. So there's 2 up here, 2 there. So there's some books around you guys can look at, and you can go into it and share that story. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to do this, okay? If you didn't get a chance to do it, why don't you come up here with me, and I'll walk you through it, and then you can work on it. Does that sound like a cool plan, you guys? I know at least 2, maybe more, and then we can at least get you started on it. And if that feels good to you, we can maybe even have a chance to share. Okay? Okay, all right, here we go. All right. Page 11, I think. Page 11. We're going to shift gears, and we're going to move toward week 3, staying faithful and focused. Now, before we get to the content, which is mostly fill in the blank, and it moves pretty fast, tell me, one at a time, why is it important to reflect upon our faith journey like we did through this or any other kind of reflection method? Pat?
So that you know where you are today in the present.
Yeah, to know where you are in the present. Yeah.
And figure out where you want to go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great way to understand where have I been, where am I now, and where am I going, right? Or where do I hope to go? Because it doesn't always work out the way we always, have a vision in our head, but we are on a journey that takes us somewhere. And then, why else would it be? Why else would this be such an important, I'll say, exercise, this reflection exercise? You only get one. Mindy.
Because I would imagine most of us came to know the Lord through someone else talking with us. And so so for us to be able to share that, you know, I mean, it's a wonderful thing in my life, and if I can talk to someone else about, you know, how they can experience that same thing, that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, I've always thought and taught that if it's really that important to us, then other people may want to also know it and have the opportunity to experience what we experience. And while it's not perfect, I mean, I did have a guy one time tell me in a conversation, so you're saying that if I, start believing in Jesus, my life's going to be, and it's like, no, I'm not saying your life's going to be easy. Jesus, in fact, said it wasn't going to be easy, right? But there's this tendency that people long for something to make their life right. Our promise is, hey, I don't know what God's going to do in your life, but here's what God's done in my life. And it's a personal living example of a faith-filled person doing their best to experience God on a daily basis, right? And so by knowing our story, and you'll notice that I didn't put it in a template form that allows you to memorize it like an elevator speech, because they're all a little different every time, because the nuance of it, your story, will always depend on who you're talking to, right? And we could get into that in great detail. But what else? What's another reason, Lee?
Well, I think that your testimony is the only thing that a non-believer can't dispute or say, I don't believe that, because it's your story. It's personal, and it's something that somebody else can't say, well, that never happened to you. And I think that in a class like this, we can learn to do that with ease and grace and enthusiasm, where on our own, sometimes we stumble because we're afraid that the person will come up with something that knocks our testimony down.
Yeah. And there are those people who will say things like, oh, that's really nice, Lee. Man, great story. That's really great. And then turn around and go, that guy's crazy. Not because you're crazy, but because they're like, there's no way that happened to somebody. Right? So they may not tell it to your face, but here's where it gets really interesting, is when your story and your life match up. So I hear a story of Lee, and it's an interesting one, and he has, whether it's off the charts kind of unique, or whether it's like everybody else's, it's his story, it's personal. He can't take that away from you. That's what you just said, right? It happened to you, it's your story. But when your story, either I knew you before and now I've seen amazing life change in your life. Remember me telling you the story of my dad going back to near his home to be a pastor, and people going, wait, you're that guy, right? Or, hey, here's this guy's story. He says these things that are important to him, and not only does he say it, he lives it out. And that's where it becomes real. And that's what you're saying. It's like it's the combination of the two, right? Barry?
I want to add one too.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get so busy, we don't take the time to really do something like this, like a lifeline or whatever, to see where there were significant changes. But what this helped me do too is, within the course of 2 or 3 years for me, it's been pretty dramatic compared to where I was. So it's good to just take some time to write those things down.
Yeah, and that's a great exercise. And like I told you, I do a variation of this regularly, because I want to know, am I making any progress towards what I say I believe in, right? And I also have some people around me, we'll call them accountability partners, who go, help me go, hey, am I becoming more like Jesus every day or not? And that's the goal for me, right? And that, I don't mean that in a Christianese kind of, just off the cuff kind of say it because everybody has to believe it. I just mean I want people to go, hey, I noticed this about you, and if you really want to become like Christ, you might want to work on it. And those are things that are hard to hear sometimes, but if you don't take the time to personally reflect or reflect with other people, right, you can kind of, as we often do, make it seem like we're doing better than we really are. It's like, if you ask people, for example, are you a regular, do you come to church regularly? Oh, yeah. When was the last time you were here? About 5 months ago. Well, so in our minds, we think the best of things, right? Oh, I'm doing great in this, I'm doing great in this. And then it's like, really, but when we reflect, assess, oh wait, I got some room to grow here. So there's all kinds of tools. Let me, were you going to say something?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
When I was young, I couldn't take constructive criticism, but now I can do it because I know, okay, what can I do to better myself and stuff, and it's just like,
Yeah.
it's just like in a weird way of how we get taught and stuff, and how to, I struggle with learning disabilities, but now since I've gotten deeper in my faith, sometimes I think, God, I think I can almost understand what God is getting at in this certain scripture.
That's great,
what
man.
He's doing
That's
and
great.
stuff. And I don't claim to know everything, but it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, a word I might use for that is as we become closer toward and more near to God and more live like His Son Jesus, then we get kind of humble. We grow to realizing, like, I might not have all the answers. Maybe somebody's feedback for me would be beneficial to me. And it sounds like that's where you've kind of come to in your life. And we always need more of that, right? Always, always, always. I'm a baseball coach, like I told you. And it's so funny to have the kids who are 14 come up after the game and say things like, now, Coach, I think if you would have done this. And it's like, well, wait a minute. Like, am I willing to hear what a 14-year-old has to say? Or do I think, they don't know what they're talking about, they're 14? Like, and just the posture that you take, right? And I'll honestly tell you, kind of similarly to you, early in my life, I'd been like, whatever. Now it's like, well, wait a minute. They're the ones out there on the field. Maybe they know something I don't know, right? So, Pat.
Well, something in your story, I mean, you might inspire something in your story might resonate.
Absolutely.
And they might stop and think, you know?
Yep, absolutely. That's another great way. Kind of what Mindy was saying, kind of what Barry was saying, and Lee all kind of wrapped into one is they might feel connected through your story and situations in their own life, right?
And it might make them go to church.
Yeah, it might help them find Jesus and find a church, find a community. You just never know, right? Well, let's look at page 11 and let's move here. I have this exercise that I like to do. I mentioned it last week, called 3 by 3 by 3. See that? It's like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to pray for 3 people 3 times a day for 3 minutes. And you'll be amazed at how much through this prayer and this daily prayer 3 times a day for 3 minutes, you become more aware to what's happening around you. I think it's just a way to not only pray for people's names specifically, but to stop what you're doing, to take the emphasis off of your day and to put it on someone else's day or where someone might be. And it's an opportunity, like, you know, we have a board at our house where we keep, like, you know, what's the meals for the week, right? And it's also a great place for me to keep the 3 names, right? Because I eat 3 meals a day, it's a great reminder, sometimes more, I shouldn't admit that, but that, you know, it's a great reminder for me that's when I'm going to do my prayer time, right? And so whatever your rhythm is, try to do this. Pray 3 times a day for 3 people for 3 minutes. So it's a minute apiece. And these are simple prayers. They don't have to be like written out. Although, if you Googled some, there might be some prayers that you would want to pray for someone else that you didn't have to write or think up. And so sometimes I use an app called Mission St. Clair on my phone, and it has apps for me, prayers for me. So there's all kinds of tools. I have a prayer book. I mean, I'll have all kinds of different things. I use Anglican prayer beads sometimes, and then on each of the 3 main sections of the beads, not counting where the cross is, that's where the name is. And so then I'll move it through my fingers, and then I get to the big bead. Oh, I'm going to pray for Rick. Oh, I'm going to pray for Bill. I'm going to pray for Sue, whoever it is that I'm praying for. So there's all kinds of techniques. And what it does is it not just helps you to think of these people, but it really truly says, I believe in prayer, and I believe that God's prevenient grace is at work in the world, and we're partnering with what God's already doing. God used me to speak to these. It could be coworkers, could be neighbors, could be family, could be in any number of people. But here's 12 ways to stay faithful. And there might be 15 ways, there might be 20 ways for all I know, but I'm going to give you these 12. And the first one is simply this: be intentional. one of the ways that you can best share your faith is just to be intentional. Not necessarily, again, I don't want you to think that you see people with an agenda. That's not it. You don't have an agenda for people. It's not to convince people to follow Jesus, like, and persuade them and be on their case, and, you know. But you are intentional with the questions that you ask and the conversations that you're involved in and the actions that you take, right? All of those things. Be intentional. 2, give people a chance to belong before they believe. I grew up in an environment where if you didn't believe what the people around you believed, you weren't welcome. And they may not tell you you're not welcome, but you would feel it normally. And I think it's so important, and this is why we talk at Church of the Resurrection, is building a Christian community. We want people to feel welcome no matter what questions they have, no matter where they are on their spiritual journey. You can belong here, and you can belong here forever. We don't care. We'd love to see you grow in your faith, become a Christian and grow in your faith, but if you just need a place to belong, you can do that here. You don't necessarily have to believe before you belong, like some communities, like, oh, you don't think like we think, so you can't really be here. And that sounds like an extreme example, but it happens more often than you think, right? And sometimes it happens even in the midst of, like, not realizing we're doing it, so.
Can you give us a couple of examples of doing that one-on-one?
I mean, that would just be welcoming somebody you don't know when you see them in the narthex on Sunday. You can always tell first-time people. I mean, one of these days, go out, don't tell them I told you to do this. Leave the service just a little bit early. Go through everything, right? But here's why. Here's why. So you can see people exiting the doors. And I guarantee you'll be able to notice people who are there for the first or second time, because they'll start looking around at, how do I get out of this place? And it's a great way to go, I'm going to go say hi to that person. And it's an easy way. It's like when you're walking, back in the day, we don't have maps anymore, of course, they're on our phones. But, if you were walking down where I grew up in New York City and you saw somebody with a map, you knew they're not from here, right? And so it was an easy way to strike up a conversation with somebody that wasn't from here. It was also an easy way to be a target for those who wanted to take wallets or something. But so I think what we need to do is just be observant and see that thing. Another one is just, another opportunity is for you to know that maybe somebody doesn't fit what might be called the social norm, but you go out of your way to help them belong anyways, right? Those kinds of things.
Volunteering to be a greeter kind of fine-tunes your...
That's great, yep. That's great. Be a greeter. You'll run into lots of people, won't you?
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, you can volunteer to be a greeter. I tell you, I think I told this group, one of my favorite ways to volunteer is on Christmas and Easter, I hold the door for people. I think it's great. I love it. I just say, welcome to church, Merry Christmas, or Happy Easter, or whatever it is. You'd be surprised how many people you get a chance to talk to, even if briefly, to make sure they know, you're welcome here, man. I'm so glad you're here, right? Greeting, big one. Number 3, it's important to know that everyone is on a journey. Everyone's on a journey. This is another way of understanding and reflecting, I should say, on your story, is to realize you didn't wake up one day and just be a reflection of Jesus, right? It's a journey. It's a process. It's a path that you're on, right? And so the opportunity for you to realize that other people are on a journey too. And not to get into your story in front of everybody, but you were saying, hey, my dad, we went to church growing up, and then it was kind of one of those churches where you didn't have to go deep, right? It was kind of servicey, it was almost social. And then I grew up, went off to college and whatever, long story short, my dad he's an atheist now, right? And so, that's a journey. It doesn't mean that what's your dad's name?
Bill.
Doesn't mean Bill is, an atheist forever, but for right now, Bill's exploring what, the answers to these questions he's had probably for a really long time, right? You had a similar experience. You said, listen, I grew up in a church where Christianity was taught, but I never understood the atheist arguments. I'm going to study both, and look where you are today, right? So, we're all on a journey. We're all progressing, and it's really important that we remember that for people. It's because I might run into one of you on one day, and 6 months later run into another one of you, but it's all in God's plan for how I'm understanding and recognizing the gospel, because I'm on that journey. Number 4, be conversational. Be conversational. I think when you're intentional and you're helping people belong and you realize people on a journey, some of the best things to do is just strike up conversation. Just be conversational. And you'll be surprised the kinds of things you can talk about. I flew to Boston about a week or so ago, out and back, same day, real quick trip. Actually, I think I stayed one night. But it doesn't take long to really have a conversation with the people sitting next to you if you want to. If you want to put in your buds, your earbuds and your music and just kind of take a nap, people do that too, right? It's becoming more and more that people are watching movies on their iPad or whatever. But there are times where, without being overbearing, because a good conversationalist knows when to be quiet too, right? And so you're able to go, okay, this person obviously doesn't want to talk right now, or this person started the conversation, I'm going to engage it as long as they want to engage it. So a guy asked me, I sit down in the seat, this guy had way too many bags. He's coming down the aisle. We all have seen these people before. Yeah, he's mad because there's no room in the overhead compartment. And as he goes by me, the bag hanging off of his shoulder whacks me in the back, right in the side of the head. That's all happened to us before, right? Or that's happened to all of us. And so the guy sitting next to me goes, nothing like a wake-up call, huh? Because it's 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, yeah. And I knew if this guy's witty enough to say that at 6 in the morning, he's ready for a conversation. We talked the whole way to Boston. He lives down in Stillwell, he lives about 2 miles from me. Our kids, we think we know some of the same kids in the neighborhood. Things like that. You're like, if I would have just been quiet, so I said to him, hey, do you have any faith experience? What's your faith journey like? I went to church as a kid, but I haven't been back in a really long time. Hey, there's a really cool church, that I work at. You'd be welcome to come. Where is that? Gave him my card. That's it. I don't know where, he hasn't emailed me yet. He hasn't called me yet. He might, but the next person he runs into might say, hey, what's your faith journey like? And he goes, wait, that's twice I'm hearing about my faith. Maybe I need to actually think about it, right? Be conversational. Share from personal experience. It's always better when you can say, this happened to me, versus I knew a person who said this. I knew a person who said this. Going back kind of similar to what Lee was saying, it's your story. It's personal. It happened to you, right? So own that story, or I should say it's happening to you, right? Number 6, dialogue, don't debate. When I grew up, I was trained, I think I told you this, to argue with people about how they were wrong and I was right, as it related to Christianity and all the different techniques that are used in what we call Christian apologetics. And apologetics in and of itself is simply, a defense of the faith, right? 1 Peter 3:15, always be ready to give a reason for the hope in which you believe, right? And so it's easy for us to sometimes go, and the other thing I've seen is people get defensive real quick. We're going to talk about this in a little bit when we get into the myths of non-religious people and then the religious people. But I've seen people, and I've been with people on trips even, mission trips with this church where someone has said, yeah, I just can't believe that. I just can't get into all that. And it's this defensiveness kicks up. Well, why not? Are you saying that I'm not intellectually? And it's no, he didn't say that. He just said he didn't believe it, right? He couldn't believe it. He's not saying anything personal, right? It's not personal attack, right? And so sometimes that leads us to debate. I would say number 7 is to seek God together. This is one of the questions. This is one of the things why I ask the question. So tell me, do you have a faith journey? And sometimes I find out they practice another religion, and I want to know about it. I want to learn. Well, how do you seek God? Or what are your daily practices? How do you stay in tune with God? Or, and it's just a way for us to learn from each other. Nothing says you got to adopt their religion by having a conversation with them, right? So just respect them enough to hear them out and listen. Have a prophetic imagination. And this sounds kind of tricky, but really what we're talking about is it's almost like the last question that you answered in your faith journey on page 9 about what you hope for, what you hope God does in your life, or what you hope to see in your future. It's like God has a plan, and God's plan is that one day the world would be made new. Remember that from our very first lesson together, the big storyboard we did of God's big story? And if we truly believe that, then it's an opportunity for us to see the way the world could be. And so when we see something on the news, or when we react to something that's happening right before us, or when we comment on a certain social issue or political issue or religious issue, we do so with humility, but we also do so knowing that this is something that God didn't intend for the world, but the world's not going to stay that way. It's not always going to be broken. One day it's going to be made whole. And living into that hope that we have gives us a picture of the way the world could be, not just the way the world is. And you'd be surprised how many people that I talk to on a daily basis, weekly basis, sometimes when I'm lazy with engaging conversation, and about, well, I tell you, man, yeah, the world there is struggle right now. But you know what? I don't think this is the end of the story for humanity. It's that simple. People will say, well, what's the end of the story? Do you know if someone asks me the end of the story, what I get to share with them? The entire gospel. Well, I'll tell you, in order for me to tell you the end, I got to tell you the beginning. Okay, start from the beginning. I mean, and there it is. I tell the whole stained glass window in the way that I do it. You all need to figure out a way that you do it, but all the elements of those 8 episodes, right? And it's usually things like, you can say to people, especially if you know them, the times where like you've made decisions to benefit yourself instead of benefit others. Oh yeah, I can be selfish like that. Yeah, that's the struggle. That's the same struggle that Eve had in the garden. Really? Yeah. So you relate it to their life, right? You parallel it. You never say, you're selfish just like Eve, right? You say, those times in your life, like, here's some for me, and you give personal experience, not what you see in somebody else. Most people are so used to being criticized that they're almost unwilling to have a conversation because they think someone's going to criticize them. It's like, no, I'm not here to criticize you. I'm here to tell you a story. That's it, right? Prioritize sharing your faith story. Make it a priority. Ask yourself, at the end of the day, did I share my faith story today? Or in what ways did I share my faith story? This is number 10. Reflect on your faith story. This is why I asked you earlier, why is it important to go through some like Lifeline or River of Life journey or the storyboard we did? Like, why is that important? Because when we reflect on it, it reminds us who God is, God of grace and love and mercy. And it compels us to action. And when it compels us to action, number 10, reflect on your faith story. Number 11, story is the currency for human interaction. You want to get somebody's attention, say these words. Let me tell you a story. Right? Now, if you're a horrible storyteller, you only have a certain amount of time, right, where that let me tell you a story is going to engage. But if you can learn through conversation how to tell a story, it's like have you ever known somebody who wants to tell a joke, but they tell the punchline first, and then they try to make the punchline funny, and you're like, yeah, that's not funny. Well, a story can be like that too, right? Where it's like it's not a really good story. Right? But yours is because it happened to you. And so the opportunity for you to say, hey, can I share my story with you? Or this is what happened to me. Or tell me your story. That's another great question to ask somebody, by the way. It's just if you're sitting with somebody, let's say did you hear about the train eventually going to go in from St. Louis to Kansas City that the guy from Tesla is going to put in? Did you hear this? It was in the news a while back. You can be in St. Louis in 30 minutes. That would be awesome. Yeah, just because I want to go there and eat on some of their awesome Italian restaurants, man. But anyway, let's say we're sitting on the train and we got 30 minutes between here and St. Louis. One of the best questions you should ask somebody is like, hey man, so tell me your story. What's with you? What's going on? And all of a sudden, there's their story. Now you gotta be ready, because sometimes you'll be like, whoa, your hair will be back and you're gonna be scared or whatever. I did. I asked the guy that one time, and he told me that when he got out of prison, and he went into his story about how he got into prison, and I had to be ready to hear it. And it was hard. But you know what? At the end of the conversation, he said, you're the first one who's ever sat and heard my whole story. And I said, well, I'm kind of afraid of you now. No, I didn't say it. But like, your story's very captivating, dude. You should tell your story more. That's right. We need to understand anticipation and expectation. Anticipation and expectation. These are two great words. These aren't necessarily theological words, but they can have theological meaning. Anticipation and expectation. We're anticipating that we're participating in what God's already doing, but then we're expecting that the Holy Spirit is going to show up and do what the Holy Spirit does and guide us and direct us and give us an opportunity to bestow God's grace to other people as we receive it from God on a daily basis. So these are just 12 ways. You might have more ways. You might be able to make a list of 20. I just capped it at 12 and said that's enough. Let's figure out how we can stay faithful and how we can stay focused. I want you to take, let's see, let me just track our time here. I got 20 after. Let's take just, how about this? You get one person and you each get 1 minute, so 2 minutes, unless there's 3 in your group. We'll stretch, but I'd like you to go 2 if you can. And just share with the person, which one of these 12 do you need to maybe work on the most, right? Which 2, maybe which 1, maybe which 3. But you only get a minute. Give each other a minute and stick to the minute. I'm going to actually time it since we're on a schedule here. And then we'll go from there. So I got, let's see. You can start anytime. You'll get more time that way. Ready, set, 1 minute, go. Okay, time's up. Time's up. Go ahead and turn to page 12, and we're going to talk about these common misconceptions of both non-religious people and of religious people. Now, let me tell you how we arrived at these misconceptions. So, about, I guess it was 3 years or so ago, I did a survey, and I did this through, pardon me, I did this through a local marketing firm who has a great way of capturing people's interest by walking into a restaurant. You hand them a coaster, and the coaster was their free appetizer or drink, whatever they wanted, and they just had to answer some simple questions. And so if you ever want to get real data from people in a hurry, give them free food, okay? I learned that, okay? And it was great. We did it over several nights. We did it at a couple local restaurants. And it was a great success. And we got tons and tons of information. And one of the questions, the major question we were asking is, how would you describe religious people? Or how would you describe non-religious people? And I can't remember exactly how it was phrased, but that's how we got this information. These aren't things I just made up. These are things we heard from real people, okay? Now, we might have only heard it once, but it was good enough to make the list. But others of these we heard repeatedly. Okay? And so just know that these are real things we've heard, and you've probably heard some of these too. So we're going to start with addressing the common misconceptions of non-religious people. And I even remember the night we were collecting the data on this, and we were asking people, the first question was, are you a follower of Jesus? And they said no. We said, okay, thanks, survey's over. Here. Have an app on us, right? If they said yes, we asked them a follow-up question, and we said, how would you describe people who aren't followers of Jesus? So that's how we got to this, right? And so the first one was, they're miserable. Really? That's interesting. Maybe some are, but I know some Christians that are miserable too, right? So they're not all miserable because they haven't found Jesus, you know?
If I flip over to TBN and watch them doing their thing, they say that all the time.
Yeah, it's not fair.
They're miserable.
Yeah.
Think about everyone that
Yeah.
they're miserable.
Yeah. I mean, most of the people most of the non-religious people, or the people who have, I would just say they would check the none box on a survey, no religious affiliation. They're having a good life. They're enjoying it. And those are the people that are harder to kind of help share Jesus with, right? Because they're like, tell me why I need Jesus again, because I feel like everything's going good, But you're right. I hear that too, and it's not a myth.
I've known atheists or people who were agnostics who were the happiest people.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And I knew a guy who was so funny and stuff that you would think he was a Christian or whatever. He followed But I asked him, do you believe in God? And he said, no, I don't believe in
Yeah.
God.
Yeah, so you just can't ever tell just that those poor people that don't have Jesus. Well, yeah, you want them to find Jesus, but don't assume they're all miserable people, right? The second one, we're going to move these pretty quick. The second one was that somehow they chose, right? They know their options, that they chose not to be a follower. And I'm telling you more and more, especially with the young teenagers that I work with, they have no like conception of, they know right and wrong, right? Of course, you learn that early, but they don't know like, okay, Coach Chris, tell us what do you do? You work at a church? We've never been to a church. What's that? These teenagers, not just teenagers, a lot of people, 20s and 30s and 40s, 50-year-olds. I mean, not everybody has a faith background. Not everybody knows that this is even an option for their life. That somehow, and this goes with 2 and 3 kind of go together, but they somehow made a choice to be non-religious. Some have. Some have said, I'm not believing that. That's a lie. That's just a hoax, and we'll get into some of the other things down below here, but Christians just need a crutch, or I can't believe that.
Some people
But some
Christians, that the whole Christian belief and all that New Testament is a fairy tale.
Yeah, they say
I've
things
heard
like that, right? Number 4, they must be persuaded or forced. Somehow like, oh, you got to give it to them, right? You got to tell them like, you might only get one chance, and these are the sandwich board in New York City stories I told you. They don't like turn or burn, the people walking down the street preaching the message, and people will be like, why is that guy screaming? Why is he hollering? Like, what's he yelling at? Why is he so angry? Oh, he loves God. Hey, what? That doesn't mean you don't get passionate. That doesn't mean you can't have anger in your life, but somehow they can't equate, like, this guy screaming at me and the love of God. Like, right? So it's, here's another one we heard a lot. Some people just don't have enough common sense or intelligence, to accept the faith. I'm like, that's not what faith is. Faith is faith. Faith is going, I choose to believe, right? I mean, some of the smartest people in the world have decided not to follow Christ. Some of the smartest people in the world have decided to follow Christ. It's not about intelligence, right?
People at the lowest with the lowest.
Yeah, I'm trying to get through this. We're going to work our way through this, right? And then we'll do some comments at the end with that. No, you're fine. Number 6, they should trust us. Oh, they should trust Christians. Really? I mean, the natural human kind of element in a place where you're kind of a stranger or you're new to is to kind of be reserved and kind of be a little skeptical, isn't it? Right? And I think that's because we all operate under this idea of safety, but we don't necessarily just think, oh, well, they should trust us. Why? Because we're good people. Well, some people are good people. I know some people who have been studying the Bible their whole life. They're still jerks, right? So it doesn't mean anything. Oh, you should trust me. Why? Because I'm a Jesus follower? Well, okay. There's people who say they like to follow Jesus, and there's people they'll actually change their life to accommodate a life in the way of Jesus. One's a fan, one's a follower, right? And so there's all kinds of people out there. Here's another one. I remember reading the comments, but the basic summary was, they've heard of Jesus before. And I don't know that everybody has. Most people who have an education have had a philosophy class, and maybe even if Jesus wasn't the Savior of the world in that class, Jesus had great philosophy. And they may come into contact with Jesus, but they don't necessarily know that like Jesus as we know Jesus. And to assume that they do is just, we know what happens when we assume, right? We don't need to go down that road, right? They don't have enough faith. Oh, if they would just have enough faith. Well, I want to say if it was the same person, earlier you just said they didn't have enough intelligence, but now you're telling them they don't have enough faith. Which one is it, right? So they just can't believe it. There's some things that are really hard for me to believe too. And still to this day I have doubts sometimes. It's like, man, and it's not the doubting I'm afraid of, it's the apathy towards the figuring out whether it's real or not that I'm most afraid of, right? The doubts are going to come. I mean, I've we've all heard even our pastor tell us, yeah, doubts come into my mind all the time, and then you work your way through them, right? They're questions, we're human people. They don't know what it means to do good. Somehow, I heard this at a conference, by the way. I was speaking at a conference in Washington, D.C. about 6 months or so ago, and it was a Christian conference on mission, right? And I was asked to come and speak on a certain project that I had written. And so after my workshop was done, I always like to end early. They like it that way. You get good evaluations when you end early. So we're walking down the hallway, and I stopped because I thought I heard a person's voice of someone that I knew. And I was like, oh, I think that's so-and-so. It didn't end up being so-and-so. And I'm so glad, because this person was building the case that if the church wasn't around, there wouldn't be any good in the world. And I think I know what that person meant, that the church does a lot of good, but there's different ways to say that, right? Different ways to frame that. And to think that we're the only ones that do good work is just not true. And do we do good work? Yes. Maybe there's a different purpose behind our work. Okay, fair. Maybe we're getting closer, but just say, oh, well, it's a good thing. And it's no, that's when you have that error, that attitude. No wonder people don't want to hang around the church, right? There's nonprofits and for-profits, for that matter, that have cause campaigns all the time that do great things for people, right? All good is God's, by the way. You don't have to be threatened if somebody outside the church is doing good work, right? And the last one is, I forget how we phrased the question, but essentially the response was, oh, yeah, non-religious people would care if the church went away. And this is something to think about. Is if
Would or would not?
they would care if the church went away. Well, non-religious people would care about it if it went away. That's a misconception, because they actually don't care. They don't care, right? So the misconception is that non-religious people would care if the church went away. And they wouldn't care.
Caring is
Some may, and some won't. Yeah.
mean, if it's physically there, they'll say, okay, I'll put up with it, but if it's not there, either way.
Yeah, I mean,
Justified.
yeah, there's all kinds of reasons for it, right? When you get into the depth of the data, because we've done multiple surveys besides the ones that I'm getting at here, one of the biggest things that showed up was that churches don't pay taxes. Property, they don't, and so because they don't pay taxes, people are like, well, that's not, I want the church to have to pay tax. If there wasn't a church there, there'd be a tax-paying building there. And you're like, well, maybe not. But there's all kinds of reasons why people don't necessarily like church. But so there's all kinds of things. There's all kinds of misconceptions, and myths is another way. Let me just ask, what's one or two things, just keep it real simple here because we're on a time schedule. But what's one or two things you would add to this list? Is there anything you've come into contact with where you'd be like, hey, I think that, Christians have these common misconceptions about non-religious people, and here's one of them. Anything you'd add, Pat?
Just be pig-headed.
Yeah? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Could be stubborn, pig-headed, whatever the word is for it, right? Anything else? Arrogant.
I have a belief, and it may be wrong, but the way I see it is they're willfully ignorant.
Yeah, some people are willfully choosing not to explore, right? Choosing not to.
Same thing with the persecution of the Jews, and it's just everyone thinks some people, especially neo-Nazis, and thought all Jews were bad and stuff, and it's just not all Jews are bad.
Right.
That's just saying all Muslims are bad.
Right.
That's not true.
Or all Christians, or all anybody for that matter, yeah. Well, let's move on. 10 common misconceptions about religious people. These are things that came up on the survey. Remember, the question was, if the question was they're not a follower, we'd ask them a follow-up question, okay? Goody two-shoes, which I hadn't heard that one in a long time, but and I had to look this up. This actually comes from a story in 1765 or something, where this girl has one shoe and someone gives her two shoes, and then she thinks she's better than everybody who has one or two shoes. That's where it comes from. I had to look it up because I was like, I have no idea what this means. I actually Googled it. Where did goody two-shoes come from? Here's another one. They believe a lie. And I put this in the category where C.S. Lewis said in his writings, and other apologists have said it too, that people either think Jesus is a liar, a lunatic, or the Lord, right? And some have added legend. It's just this story along the way that it wasn't even a real person. Well, okay, so they all start with L, but most people say, oh, they're just believing a lie, right? And here's one we already talked about. Oh, religious people need a crutch. They need something to lean on when life gets hard, so they go to church, or they need a story to kind of help them feel better about themselves. These are things we hear all the time. 4, this one came up repeatedly. Oh, they're gullible, which kind of is along the lines of they believe something that's not true. They're hypocrites. Well, yes, we are. We are all hypocrites, every human being,
Even the atheists.
Every human being is a hypocrite. Here's another one. They can't find friends anywhere else. That one's kind of mean. That's kind of mean, But it is true, people come to church looking for friends, and that's great. That's why we're trying to build a community. And somebody said, "Oh, they can't find friends anywhere." Maybe, I don't know. I have no science on this, but I would imagine that when they were describing these, when they were answering these questions, they probably had someone in their mind, right? A story that they know. So they're probably reacting to that person or people that they know. Oh, well, they can't find friends someone else. What's that?
That they saw in a film.
Yeah, or that they saw, it could be anywhere, right? They have some kind of presupposition of what this means. Christians blame others for the world's problems. Here's one, number 8. They just need a write-off at tax time. They need a write-off at tax time. Here's number 9 was I'm going to give you 2 words for this one fill in the blank because I think they meant a lot of times they were used interchangeably in the survey. But they're intolerant, and the other word that was used is they're judgmental. And the last one, number 10, is that they're superficial, which I didn't quite get that one because, you never know what the context is for these things, right? It's just, so why would we take time to go through how non-religious people think about religious people and how religious people think about non-religious people? Why do you think we would go through this exercise?
Find our blind spots.
Yeah, find our blind spots.
Because you might face it.
You're going to face it, right? This is a way for you to realize not everybody has a great view of the church, right? For whatever the reason. Or, there's all kinds of barriers in people's lives, but it helps you identify some of those barriers. Sometimes I'll say things like that are proactive. Like, I know, man, people say Christians are hypocrites, and we are. It's like, you get to it before they do. And it's not the Jedi mind trick or anything. It's just that, you're honestly saying, yeah, I get it. I've had conversations with people, and this is what they think, and this is how they feel. Why else would we do this? Why else would we do this exercise? Beyond just the blind spots.
So you have an answer for them.
Yeah, because we have to start developing a way that we're going to communicate and respond to people's questions. And at the very end, I'm going to put up on the screen a document that's very, very basic. But it's the 7 most common questions that skeptics ask about Christianity, okay? From some research that was done by a Christian organization. So I'm not saying it's 100% accurate. But what I am saying is that there are literally thousands of websites that enable you to figure out what are the common questions that I might be asked. And then how would I respond to those? And so what's really hard on the internet is trying to figure out which of the responses you would actually use. So I always tell people, I'm not going to give you the answer. I'm going to give you the question. And you need to figure out the answer based off your belief system, based off your belief structure. There's some things like in the responses of some of the websites that I'm going to show you just as illustrations that we just wouldn't teach here. And so I don't want you to read through them and be like, why did Chris recommend this? I'm giving you examples of questions. I'm not really giving you the responses. Fair enough? Okay. Let's look at let me just ask about the religious people one. Anything there? Yeah.
it allows you to look and kind of ask yourself, am I projecting any of these?
Yeah,
Because
that's great, man.
if you're furthering those kind of misconceptions, it's not really helping
You're
your
going-
cause or the cause.
You're going backwards, right? I mean, yeah, that's a great way to say it. It's like, am I projecting or portraying any of these? And if that's the case, reel that in, shift gears, because it's not helping, right? Yeah.
One that I thought maybe would be on the list, it seems to me the media portrays Christians a lot of times as being mentally ill. You know, they hear voices, they have a savior complex, they're unstable and all that. So I think as Christians, if we start saying things like, well, the Lord told me to do this, or, you know, well, I just was led by God to, you know, it's like, if people aren't used to that language, that can sound pretty weird.
Yeah.
But also people
Yeah.
would say like that the religion was, oh, the devil made me do this, or the devil made me, and that's happened before. Is
Yeah.
people use the devil.
Yeah, I mean, be aware. Basically, the takeaway from that is be aware of the story you're telling and the words you're choosing, because not everybody understands like church language. You know, one of the hardest things for people to grapple with is the Holy Spirit, and it's actually one of the questions that comes up in I think it's in the top 7 questions, but it's on the top, list, and that's like, well, that just sounds, or back in the day when we used to use the word Holy Ghost more than we used Holy Spirit, people be like, or think about this, like some of the great hymns of our faith. I grew up singing a hymn that washed in the blood of the Lamb. If you're a non-religious person and you come into church and you're talking about washed in the blood of the Lamb, you're out of the door, man. You're like, I'm out of here, right? Now you might have been welcomed and you might stick around, but the point is, I don't get this. This is weird to me, and just to understand that, we choose to live things by faith first and foremost, and then as we grow into an awareness of truth, things that we believe to be true from Scripture, then not everybody's going to always understand that. And I think that's Mindy's point. It's a great point. Lee, you were going to say something?
Well, I just was going to say, I think an awful lot of non-religious people expect us to be perfect in our faith all at once. They don't give us the growth process, or you said some people absorb religion intellectually, but not
Practically or lifestyle, yeah.
And I think that's one of the ways that we're judged the harshest. And, it's also a challenge for us to grow quicker, I think, because we are being observed,
Yeah.
I want to make a comment.
Yes?
Okay. Especially if you look at the religions of the world, there's not one religion that so-called, having whoever they profess to be, the followers, like the Muslims,
Uh-huh.
And then like the Buddhists, they don't have their so-called God come to earth to die and be nailed on the cross. So sometimes, honestly, I'm just coming from that angle, is
Yeah.
because I was born and raised, in a third world country,
Right.
especially with Muslims and
Yeah.
Hinduism and Buddhism
Yeah.
surrounded by these kind of religions. I honestly can tell you that it will be that for the non-religious, not saying they're not religious, but for people who say that, why is it a lie? Because they don't have such
Yes.
believe in somebody who, like Muhammad didn't die on the cross, and neither did, Confucius
Right.
or whoever.
Right, whoever they
Buddhism,
choose to believe, right.
Whoever their God is,
Yeah.
coming to earth to, do what Christ did.
Right.
So I'm just
Yeah.
throwing this out.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, that's in line with what we're saying, right? It's in keeping with the spirit of our conversation, which is, we can't expect that someone's just going to go, oh yeah, I get that. Oh yeah, born of a virgin, dead, buried, rose again. Like these are things. Oh yeah, sure, I can. No, these are things you grow to choose to believe in, right? That you believe in by faith, and that's not their story. And so here, like, we don't know everything about that's their narrative either, right? And so that's why having conversations and places of dialogue is really helpful. Interfaith dialogue is great. I mean, we need more and more of it all the time. Let's look at page 13. I just want to make sure we're on time. Yep, you got 1 minute.
Non-religious people expect us not to be sinners. They expect us to be good.
They expect some, say it again, I didn't catch that.
Non-religious people expect us not to be sinners.
I think that's kind of what you were saying about, and the fact of the matter is, like, a lot of times it has less to do with what the action that we take and more to do with how we respond to the action that we've taken. So, like, let me give you an example. You know, I'm human, and I have yelled at umpires before too, right? Imagine that. And, you know, it's like, there was one that that's a long story, I won't get into it, but I stepped over the line, you know, literally, like onto the field, you know. You know, you're not allowed to do that. Now, he didn't kick me out, he had every right to. And, you know, I could see that the boys, and even as soon as I had done it, I realized, man, what have I just done? I'm acting like an idiot all over a youth baseball game, when all I ever do is talk about the people who act like idiots at youth games, and now I'm it. And so the kids were looking at me like, Coach, you've never done anything like this, like, you know, and this may not be a great example, but afterwards I said, you know, boys, here's what happened, and here's what I did that was wrong, and I make mistakes too, and I shouldn't have done it, and as soon as I'm done talking to you, I'm going to go find the umpire and apologize to him. And so I did. They watched me, and just so happened he was sitting on a picnic table waiting to ump his next game. There he was. I said, hey, my bad. He goes, I understand. We all get heated. He goes, but I should have thrown you out. And I said, you could have, and that would have been right. And I said, I wouldn't have liked it, but I would have got. So we had a little, and a couple weeks later, we're playing in a tournament. Who's the umpire?
Him.
And he said, I know you. And I said, I know you too. You're a really nice guy. And, you know, so we had a joke about it. But my point in that is how you respond to the things that you do that are the shortcomings in our life, or the you know, the sins in our life. It's like we would respond and take appropriate response to those things. It can go a long way because we are human. And I think generally speaking, most people know that, but not all. Some people expect, that's where they get the hypocrite thing from. Oh, well, you say this and then you do this. You go to church on Sunday or Saturday or whatever, and then on Tuesday you're acting like this or you're doing this. And yeah, we do. We make mistakes. So here's what I want to do next is I want to look at page 13, and I want to give us some time to talk about this on page 13. We're nearing the end. This will be the last big concept that we talk about. But there's 4 zones there. You see that? Moving past your comfort zone, finding your grow zone. And this comes from a graphic that I saw on my Twitter feed one day, and I kind of adapted it. I don't know where it originally came from because I couldn't find it after I drew it on the napkin. So I've been searching. So if anyone has seen something like this, follow up with me after so I can get to find out exactly where this illustration came from. I've nuanced it a little bit, adapted it, but I would like to be able to credit the source. So I'm telling you, this isn't mine, right? But I don't know where it came from exactly. But here's the thing, right? We have these 4 zones. We have a comfort zone, a fear zone, a learning zone or a learn zone, and a grow zone. And maybe you know yourself really well and you know what your comfort zone is. Let's take one of my fears that has nothing to do with spirituality or religion. But so I never used to be afraid of heights, but I can feel myself now becoming more and more afraid of heights. Like I dislike it. Even when I was young, I would roof with my grandfather. We wouldn't even tie down. We would just put shingles on a roof. You didn't think twice about it. Last time I was on a roof, I was like, I'm crazy for being up here. Why am I not tied down? You know, I just had this feeling. There's been times before in my life where, like, if you've ever been, like I was at the what do they call it in Calgary? You stand on the glass floor in the big tower there, you know. I forget what it's called in Calgary.
Sears Tower?
No, that's in Chicago. But it's like that, right? You stand out on the glass, you know, and you're like standing out over the street, you know, and I'm like, I can do this. Oh, no, I can't, you know. Now, here's the thing, like that has nothing to do with our sharing our faith, but we all know where we like to feel safe and where our comfort zone ends, right? We know where that space is. We know where it's like, it's getting difficult here. I don't like doing this. Or I'm uncomfortable doing this. And some of that has a lot to do with just the fact that we haven't practiced it before and we don't have enough information. And some of it is, well, we've tried some things and it's not gone well or whatever, so we've learned from it. And this is what I'm trying to help us know, is that the best thing that we can do is that we can make our comfort zone bigger. That's the goal, really. The goal is to make your comfort zone bigger. And so as you live into and conquer some of your fears and you learn from them, your comfort zone gets a little bit bigger. Right? I shared this with my baseball players, and we related it to baseball. And it was a similar thing. Like I talked to some kids, they're like, yeah, I don't want to play third base. I'm not comfortable over there. Right? Well, I'm going to put you there until you are, kind of thing, right? But the reality is, in our comfort zone, maybe you can write this in the box, but we're safe and in control. That's where we are safe and in control. It's our comfort zone. You've heard the phrase a million times. You know, people need to get out of their comfort zone. Or how to step out of your comfort zone. It's we're safe and we're in control. Why are we safe?
Because we're in control.
Yeah, because we're in control. We know what's going to happen to us. We can make sure the bad things don't happen to us, right? We like this space. It's what?
Predictable.
Predictable. That'd be a great word for it. Hey, I know what's going to happen to me, right? I'm good. Okay? Our fear zone, though, is where we start to lack confidence and find excuses. Right? We lack confidence and find excuses. Well, I'm not so sure this feels right to me. Or what if I mess up? Or I can't do that because. Or, you know, here's a common one as it relates to sharing your faith. I just don't know enough. Or, you know, no one's interested in my story. So they make up excuses so you don't have to share your story. Right? And so, you know, we all know this, right? Our comfort zone is, it's easy. It's easy just, you know, I told you that story, I think most of you were here, but I'll summarize it. But across the street, I'm eating coffee, I'm getting coffee, I'm talking to this guy wearing a Billy Butler jersey. Remember that story? Yeah. And, you know, the comfort zone is easy for me. I can talk about baseball and, you know, sports all day long. All day. I mean, and every little bit of it interests me. Like, I don't find any of it boring. Anything with competition, I'll watch. I will. And I'll pay to see it. I just enjoy sport, right? So that's easy for me. I can have a conversation with anybody about that. The hard part is, and where I start to feel lack a little bit of confidence and fear, is when I start transitioning the conversation from sports into faith. I've had to learn what are the simple ways for me to do that. Things like asking questions like, so what's your story, man? Or, you know, hey, are you a part of a church? You know? People aren't offended by that question, and if they are, don't ask it again. I mean, but that's how you learn. That's how you get outside. You start to find excuses why you're not doing something, you know. And for me, it's easy to say things like, "Well, I don't have time. I didn't really have all the time in the world to talk to the person on the plane," or say, you know, you can come up with a million reasons why, but you know. I remember talking to my wife one time. We had just finished dinner, and we were putting the dishes in the dishwasher, and we were chatting, and we were talking about the new neighbor, and that just moved in a couple doors down. And my son Drew, he was probably 13 at the time, so he had a mouth. He was running constantly, anyways, right? And he says, after hearing our discussion about why I haven't gone across the street and talked to the new neighbor yet. I had a million reasons why. Well, I've been busy, or, you know, the weather was bad, or I peeked over to the house but the lights weren't on. He's like, have you ever, Dad, just gone over there and knocked on the door? I'm like, shut up, kid. You know, like, I don't want to, you know. But, you know, that's the reality is we move from our comfort zone, it gets a little fearful, and we make excuses. Or we lack confidence. Then the confidence is what leads to the excuses, right? And so the more you practice your journey, the more you become in tune with your own spiritual life, the more you believe it, the more questions you might have, but then the more passion you have to answer those questions. The more you learn about the Bible, the more confidence you're going to have in sharing the story. I mean, this is a discipleship class as much as it is about people and sharing your faith, because the reality is the closer that you are to following Christ, the greater passion, commitment, knowledge, all of those things flourish. And that's part of it. You know, I've always said you can't give away what you don't own. So if you don't have a flourishing faith, you can't expect to give one away, right? And then we move to our learn zone, because what happens is we learn things like, and well, this is what you can write in your box, but you acquire new confidence and new skills that you didn't even know you had, right? You acquire new confidence and skills. But these are great things like that. You know, how many of you have done something you didn't want to do, looked back at it, and then said, that wasn't so bad, right? Or, you know, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, right? Or, man, that went way better than I expected it was going to go, right? I had to call a parent one time that was a parent I knew because I had seen their kid do something, and I knew if my kid wanted to, I would want to know if my kid was doing that, right? So I called him. My friend his name was Jason. He's a Leawood detective, big guy, and I said, hey man, I did not want to have this conversation, because it's hard to tell someone else that, man, hey, I just want you to know what's happening, right? This is what's going on. I thought you'd want to know.
Yeah,
right?
he knows you're a snitch.
He knows I'm a snitch. That's right. He's got me down, right? So I call him up, and we're buddies, and we have our conversation, and I'm like kind of rumbling, you know, going here and here with the conversation, rambling a little bit, kind of speaking softly. He goes, man, just get it out. What are you trying to say? So finally I tell him, I was like, that's all you had to say? Oh, thanks, man. I'm glad you let me know. I'll talk to my son about it, right? And I thought to myself, well, that didn't have to be so hard, right? Those things happen all the time in our life. I guarantee you that as you begin to share your faith and you get outside of your fear zone, you'll learn some new skills and you'll acquire some ways that work to share your faith. That's just how it works. And then your comfort zone expands, and then you'll share it more. And then that'll expand beyond. It'll give you new fears. And then you see how it works, right? Ultimately, to the grow zone. And the grow zone is where you find purpose, right? You find purpose and you set new goals. You say, okay, now I'm going to share my faith with so-and-so. Or now I'm going to attempt to do this. And maybe it's not even in word. Maybe it's, hey, I'm going to show up and serve at the local assisted living complex and just help people for a week straight, or whatever the case may be. So you find purpose and you set new goals. Right? So this is, I think, one of the best ways for us to examine where we are and on this sort of grow zone, comfort zone, kind of this expansion of our comfort zones. What I'd like for you to do in the next 5 minutes is, if you feel comfortable doing this, and I hope by now you do, take, 5 minutes, maybe 6, 7 minutes, and talk with the people around you. Maybe pick 1 or 2 people. If you want to circle up your chairs and have a bigger conversation, that's fine. But I'd like for you to identify, what are some of the fears that you have? What are some of the fears that you have about sharing your faith? Right? Like, we don't need to know you're afraid of spiders or you're afraid of whatever. Heights, like I was talking to you. But what is it about sharing your faith? Like, legitimately, say it. Get it out there. Share it. Because part of conquering that fear is identifying it in the first place. You can't solve a problem if you're first not going to admit it's there. Same thing with fears. You can't conquer it if you say, well, I'm not afraid of that, I'm not afraid of that, I'm not afraid of that. You got to say, hey, these are some things that are hard for me. Right? So go ahead and do that. And maybe you have 3 things, maybe you have 1 thing, but just share what are some fears you have, and then I want to collectively hear what those fears are. You good? All right. And then we're going to say a prayer together, and I'm going to give you some resources, and we're going to hit the road. Okay. You don't have to identify this necessarily as your fear or someone else's. But what were some of the fears that you heard as you were discussing this? David?
We're not tall like you.
You're not tall. Okay. All right, I'm sorry about that. I wish I could change that for you. No, seriously, what are some of the fears?
One of the fears is not having the knowledge of an event associated with the Bible to be able to discuss.
Give me an example.
let's take resurrection.
Yep.
At one point, I heard that after 3 days, Jesus rose. Then I heard on the third day, he rose. So I remember going to the Bible to read it myself. And the next time that subject came up, I said, no, it was on the third day he rose.
Right. Okay.
But to have that knowledge of the Bible, then you can be in a better position to discuss.
I totally agree. I don't know if I'm going to say this right. It's getting late in my day. I started my day at 4:30 this morning, so I'm pretty tired right now, which is why we're going to leave early. But I do, just being honest, all right? But I do want to say, I think you're right, and that the passion and the commitment to sharing your faith is directly proportionate to the growth in your spiritual life. I just believe it to be true. And so when you say, hey, I went and studied these things, this on my own, so if it ever comes up, now I know I've read the passage and I could take somebody to it. That's equipping yourself. That's getting into the Word and finding out for yourself if that were to happen. Now, is that going to convince somebody because they read it in the Bible that on the third day Jesus rose from the grave? Maybe. Who knows what else story has been told to them, like how many times it's been told to them. But the fact of the matter is, like, you'll feel more confident in knowing that. And I think that's a great, I'm not going to throw this at you, but I'm thinking that's great. What else? What are some other fears? Pat? Okay, what are some other fears?
The four in our group were personal rejection.
Yep.
People will think we're arrogant. We'll put other people off.
Okay.
And our story is not dramatic.
Yeah, so my story's not dramatic enough. It's boring. You might offend somebody. You'll come off as arrogant. And then what was the first one again you said?
Personal rejection.
Yeah, personal rejection. Maybe that person won't like me anymore. Or maybe they'll be, say something rude. Or, yeah, and we don't like that. We don't want that. Nobody wants that, right? Those are four very real fears that all of us, I think, at one time or another are still going to.
Those were four. Each of us had one of those.
Yeah.
It was amazing.
I know what David's was.
That we each had a different fear, but we all could go, oh yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Anybody else resonate with those four? Right? Like, so yeah, even across the table, yeah, that's the way it works.
We didn't talk about it. I mean, we talked about that, but I think my biggest fear is my personal family. Really sharing really, really deeply with them. They know my faith walk, but do we talk about it deeply? No.
Yeah.
Because
they
also know my past, and it.
Yeah.
When they reject me, that's really rejection.
Yeah. I'm not saying this is the answer for you because I don't know your situation well enough, but I did run into somebody who had a hard time articulating to his children about his newfound faith. And it was really an emergence of faith that he had discovered when he was a kid, but now he was coming back to church. And he had done some things in his life he wasn't super proud of, and some things that happened between him and their mom, and it was kind of awkward and hard. And long story short, but he wrote a letter. And, not an email, not a text, but he sat down and actually wrote a letter, and he mailed it to his children. And I may not have all the details correct, but there was one of the kids that didn't open it for the longest time because forget him, that's why, right? I mean, there was just some stuff there. But a couple of the other ones, I remember one of the things he said was that one of the kids read it and was like, good for you, Dad. Who cares? Like, okay, great. One more thing you say that may or not be true. You know what I mean? And then another one was like, wow, we should talk about this. And went to dinner and talked about it. So I'm not saying that. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just saying those are the kinds of things, like when we get creative with those experiences, those situations, maybe they will. I mean, to my knowledge, the last I spoke to this guy, the other child still hasn't opened the letter. But who knows? But he feels great about being able to go, hey, I got it out there. I mean, yeah, I want him to open it, but, that's one of the most powerful things you can do is write your story. It really is. And there's going to be one of our pastors, Pastor Angie, she's working on a class right now. I was just discussing it with her today. She's working on a class, something along the lines of what you and I, Mindy, have talked about with leaving a legacy letter, like writing a legacy letter, kind of thing. So look for that in the fall. I don't know the details, like what room it's in and what time, David. Sorry, I can't help you. But I know it's coming, right? What other fears? Yes?
Well, my fear is, I think I've told you, like I grew up in a Presbyterian church, going to Sunday school and Bible class every single Sunday until I was 18, but I had major doubts as a teenager and loads of questions. And in Scotland, you're supposed to be, as a child, you're supposed to be, in those days, you're supposed to be seen and not heard. And I didn't even, looking back on it, I could have approached our minister, we call him. He probably would have welcomed it, but you're not supposed to you weren't supposed to do that.
Yeah.
And the elders, forget the elders, they were too strict,
Yeah.
But anyway, and now when I look back on it, it was ridiculously idealistic. Didn't join the church because of that. I didn't even get married in the church because of that. And I turned my back on the church for a long time. I kept trying to go back, but the doubts always stopped me. So now, having come back to the church, how can I approach somebody? What they might think, well, what, she's got a nerve. And she's got a nerve trying to say this to me after she abandoned the church for all those years.
Yeah. Well, that would be a real legitimate fear. That's very well articulated. How are people going to receive you? It's kind of the personal rejection and or the belief one. And, again, what we're trying to do is move from grow our comfort zone, right? And so maybe strategically, what are some ways that you could do that? Think on that, pray on that. But, yeah, that's a hard one. It is. That's very real.
You also said seeing the difference in us in our daily walk is the best way.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's Joshua, right? I'm gonna put you on the spot and have you share what I overheard related to, it's not necessarily a fear, but it's something you need to work on with your restraint.
Absolutely.
So I was eavesdropping. Okay, let's just get that out there. All right. So go ahead, man. Just briefly.
It wasn't necessarily a fear, but something that was a consistent holds me back from sharing. Is not that I don't know how to explain my faith or how I came to know God. It's getting it to a consumable link that I can share it with somebody, and I don't have to give the history of the church, the fundamentals of your Christian walk, the why we are told to share our faith, given the Great Commission and the personhood of Christ and all three of the Godheads and where you can find them in the Bible and all of this information, because I know the mountain of questions that might come up. And so that's where I would come to well, maybe not this time because I don't know them well enough in order to hold their attention long enough to give the entire backstory of where I am now.
And that's a great, it's not a fear like he said necessarily, but it's an observation he's had to make about his own life to go, okay, when I share this, I don't need to give a church history class here, right? And a doctrine class. And I'm just sharing my story and the story of Jesus in the context of what Jesus has done in my life. And it's consumable. It just might be enough for that moment, And you never know. Somebody might say, after you pause and stop, somebody might say, well, what else you got? Tell me more. Okay, great. You want more? Here it comes. But knowing that, sometimes you don't want to go the other direction with people and have them all of a sudden so confused. And, if they do have a perspective on religion or a background or an experience with it, they're going to come into touch with it when you're sharing your story. And so, you don't necessarily want to relive all that, nor do you want to try to answer questions that they don't have or not answer questions that they do have because you're rambling on and on and on about, what happened in the Great Schism in 1054, when the church is split, So Look, that's a great thing. I mean, again, it's not necessarily a fear, but it's a great observation. So what I would like to do in finishing our time is first of all, this is my email right here, chris.foamsby@core.org. You can find me on the website too, but would you just jot this down somewhere in your book or look me up online? That's fine. Because
The name of the department of what we want to call it.
I give oversight to our adult discipleship program. So anything related to teaching, growing in your faith, evangelism, all of that. So
is it mainly this night, this grow night that you're in charge of?
well, that's part of what I do. Yeah, part of what I do. Yeah. We have a great team of people. There's about 14 or 15 of us, depending on where we are in staff transitions. But no, like, and it's everybody. You know, Jeff Kirby's on my team. Michelle Kirby's on my team. Daryl Holtz, who writes the GPS, is on our team. Pastor Angie, Cheryl Wilkins. I mean, it's all kind of made up of anybody that's doing something to help people grow in their faith or connect with the church or small groups. So Dave McGee's on my team, you know, all that stuff. So this is my email, and I'm giving you this for a couple of reasons. One, I'm going to go over some documents that I will email you if you email me. If you don't email me, I'm not going to send them to you. You have to, like, you know, step out here and say, hey, I would like that document, and I will email it to you. I'm going to email all three, even if you just ask for one, because it's easier for me that way than it is for me to ask you, now, which one did you want? But I'm also giving this to you because I want to be an ongoing resource for you for other tools, other resources, other workshops that we might be doing on this subject, other, you know, future classes we might teach, or online tools that I find, anything like that. And I'm going to give you one of these access to I'm going to point you to how you can get access to one of these tools here in just a second. But this is my email. Email me at any time. And it doesn't have to be, by the way, hey, I'm looking for some help with sharing my faith. It could be that, hey, I took your Cultivate class, and I'm not sure what to do next. What should I take next? I mean, just contact me. If I don't know the answer or I don't know what to schedule, I'll find somebody who can. Right? chrisfoamsby@core.org. Okay. Now I mentioned this last week, this Bless Every Home campaign. Prayer, care, and share. Be a light, for the Lord has commanded us. I have placed you as a light for the Gentiles, that you may bring salvation to the ends of the earth. And it's essentially a mobile application that allows you to get to know your neighbors by name.
That's terrifying.
Right? So now you have all kinds of other fears that you're going to have to get out of. But like this morning, when I got up at 4 a.m., I looked at my phone and I had an email. And the email was from Bless Every Home, and it showed me, today, pray for the following neighbors. And it gave me 2 ways to pray. I could enter the app and pray along with the prayers, or I could just pray by name right there. So I prayed by name. I hit the button that said I prayed for my neighbors. And eventually, by doing that, my prayer was added to this massive number of prayers that have gone out for people in Kansas City. Every neighborhood in Kansas City is in here. Now, I will tell you, like any tool, it's not perfect. Somebody moved in last week. They don't have it updated yet. But they update it, I think, every 30 days. And so you can get it. It's from blesseveryhome.com. Blesseveryhome.com. All right, I'm not going to go into explaining all of every aspect. If you were at the men's retreat and Gary Kendall came, this is what he's doing now. He's the former lead pastor at Indian Creek Community Church, and he's running this campaign now.
How do you get the names? Is that not privacy?
So they get the names from a marketing company that gets your names from Facebook and Twitter and every place you shop and everywhere else. And so all that stuff. And so it's a big national company. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to get access to this. Obviously, we're not selling things. We're praying for people. But I can tell you, on my cul-de-sac, I can name every person and every kid. When I turn the corner, either right or left, I don't know those people as well. And so it's made me go, oh, who's this? Man, they live right around the corner, right? And I've actually approached people by name. We have a strict get your garbage cans off the driveway and into the garage as soon as possible homeowners rule. And so One day I noticed when I was driving my kid when dropping Luke off for school that it was 2 days over and these cans were in this guy's driveway. And so I parked in his driveway, got out of my car, moved them as close to the garage door as possible. I didn't have access to the garage or I would have put them in there, right? But I did, And later, like I went and I saw him walking out and about and I knew his name from the app, not because I'd even ever met him before. Hey, Phil. Hey, who are you? I'm Chris. I live down the street. Hey, man, I moved your garbage cans. Hope that was all right. He's like, oh, yeah, thanks so much, because we get fines in my neighborhood for that. So, but this is how you can get blessed. Remember, bless was begin with prayer, listen, eat, share, serve and share. Remember that? I gave it to you on week 2.
Is that www.blesseveryhome?
You can just go blesseveryhome.com and it should work. Yeah. So just know this. The second thing I'll email you, besides a link to Bless Every Home, is I'm going to give you this document, which is 7 most common questions, statements that skeptics ask or say. Now you may not have ever run into these, but you also may have, and there are hundreds and hundreds of places you can go to find these questions. It just takes a little work to find the best sites, okay? But why is there evil and suffering? I get that one all the time. If there's a God, it's God so good, why is there evil and suffering? You need to have a response to that. I don't even want to say you need to have an answer, because sometimes you're still working out your answer, but your response is, well, I'm still kind of trying to figure that out myself, but here's where I am at the moment. Having some kind of a response. Now, ultimately, you ought to have an answer to that. But if you don't yet, it's okay. You can still have a conversation with somebody and just be forthright and say, man, that's a tough one. I'm still working that. And also our beliefs evolve too, by the way. We grow in our own beliefs. And so sometimes we had certain beliefs 10 years ago and now we're kind of like, I don't know, kind of maybe thinking something different about this. And that's okay too, right? What about the contradictions in the Bible? I get this one a lot. Because sometimes if people did grow up in the church, this is a common thing they say. And a lot of times they can't point to the contradictions. They can just remember that there are some. And you say things like, well, which ones are you talking about? They'll be like, well, isn't there some in the Gospels? Well, some people see them as contradictions, but omissions of content doesn't necessarily mean a contradiction. Right? Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very similar. John is not, if you're looking in John. So you can have conversations with people about these things, right? I'm not going to give you the answers because my answer and your answer might not be the exact same. And also, if you don't want to do the work of, I'm just going to be super blunt, I'm getting tired. If you don't want to do the work of finding the answers, then you're not going to remember the answer I give you anyways.
Right.
So, here's another one. How can Jesus be the only way to God? Isn't Christianity just a psychological crutch? We saw that one come up on the misconceptions. Some people, man, I could never take a leap of faith. Well, I did. Maybe you can. So there's all kinds of them. Here's some others. That's just a link to the article. Here's some others. I get this one a lot. Oh yeah? Well, when I read the Old Testament, God's just a wrathful God telling people to kill everybody. Like, how good of a God could he really be? And when you read the Old Testament, it's like, there it is. And so how you respond to that is key. Why is God so hidden if God's out there? The Trinity, when you brought up, that's a big one I get all the time. All these things. And you don't have to have a perfect answer. You have to have a humble response. I think if you don't have a humble response, then you've got a lot of work to do to figure out, like, how do I go about responding to these questions? And sometimes the questions are deeper and they're nuanced because you know somebody personally. And so they're hard to answer because when they talk around a question you see up there, it's personal because it either happened like in your family, So for example, I have a friend who was abused as a child, sexually abused as a child, okay? His deal is, okay, where was God? And so, like, when he brings it up, he says, where was God when such and such happened at such and such a place at such and such a time? And I know all of those places because I was his friend growing up. And it's harder then because it's personal, right? And it's like, okay, but there's also a beauty in that because I'm engaged in his story, right? So understanding the depth and the texture, and it's really an art form. It really is. And it's okay to just sit and cry with somebody and to share in their pain, right? Remember that place sharing stuff we talked about? I think that was this class. But there's some other things. We're almost finished. Here's some other sites. This one right here, this kids and grandkids one, I mean, I think this is worth, if you email me, just this alone. Because it's 20 questions that kids ask and then responses to the questions. And they're good questions, like stuff I know you've either asked as a kid or you heard your own kids ask you. And so just knowing that, hey, and by the way, they're not just kids that are asking these. So if you know how to respond to a 7th grader, I'm going to tell you right now, the hardest thing I do is teach confirmation. It's the hardest thing I do. 14-year-olds are smart, and they have a million questions, and they're all good. And they, when they're serious, I get the goofy questions too. But when they're serious about it, I mean, man, they got some questions, right? And I want to be able to respond to them, right? And I have theological training and stuff, and I've got, I have 2 degrees and graduate degrees and all that, but I'm still learning how to best answer these things, right? I try it? If it didn't work out, I try it a different way next time, right? Same content, but maybe a different approach. And then I have this disclaimer down here because I'm always nervous that what we send people is, the views, theological positions, and answers to the questions listed above and, are not necessarily Resurrection's stance on this stuff. And I mentioned that earlier. It's really important that you know that because you're going to look at some of these and you're going to be like, why did Chris point me to that response? I'm not pointing you to the response, I'm pointing you to the questions. And when we understand these questions, we have much more of a framework in which to get some responses and have some dialogue. I want to end with this, and I know it because it's 8:29. We're going to end right on time. I said we were going to end early. I lied, I guess. We're going to end right on time. On the very last page, page 14, there's a poem, or probably better said, a prayer from Teresa of Avila. And just reflect on this as I read this, and then I will pray the last prayer there at the bottom, and then we'll depart. It says, Christ has no body but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks with compassion on this world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands which he blesses all the world. Yours are the hands, yours are the feet. Yours are the eyes, you are his body. Christ has no body now but yours, no hands, no feet on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks with compassion on this world. Christ has no body now on earth but yours. Lord Jesus, in your wisdom, your trusted hands, our feet, our voices to share the good news with others. Grow us into a body of believers who can carry out your mission. May no one be missing in your eternal kingdom because we were afraid or indifferent. In your name we pray. Amen.